So I want you to imagine that you and your best friend both get hired to do the exact same job, like the exact same role for this massive retail company.
Right, a very common scenario.
Yeah, but the only difference is your location. So you are working in this chaotic, multi-level downtown flagship store, right? You got like 500 other employees. You're processing thousands of transactions a day.
Sounds exhausting, honestly.
Yeah, totally. But then your friend gets placed in this sleepy suburban branch, maybe 15 employees total. The biggest rush of their entire day is like 3 people asking for gift receipts at the same time.
Right. Night and day difference in the work environment.
Exactly. And common sense says you should get paid more, right? You're in a way tighter labor market. You're dealing with massive volume. And, the company needs to incentivize people to actually want to work in that high-stress, huge-scale environment.
That would be the logical assumption, yes.
Well, today, in this deep dive, we are going to show you why your massive corporate employer will do almost anything, I mean, literally anything, to ensure you do not get an extra dime for that. Welcome to the deep dive.
It's a scenario that completely defies our basic understanding of how the labor market is supposed to function. But it is the reality for millions and millions of workers today.
It really is. And we're pulling from an absolutely fascinating paper today. It's called When Size Doesn't Matter, Wage Determination in Large Firms by Dr. Jonathan H. Westover.
And it's worth noting, we aren't just looking at some small survey of like 100 people here.
No, not at all. The researchers use these massive administrative records covering 25% of all private employment in Germany.
Which is just a staggering amount of data.
Right, and they use it to completely dismantle something that economists just assumed was like a fundamental law of nature.
Yeah, our mission today is really to explore exactly why these mega corporations just flat out refuse to pay more for working at their absolute biggest locations.
And we're going to reveal the very specific, almost invisible playbook these companies use to hire thousands of people without ever raising their base pay.
But, to really appreciate the magnitude of this blind spot, we have to establish the baseline first. We need to look at the century-old rule that this new research basically shatters.
Right. Let's lay out that conventional wisdom for everyone, because this dates all the way back to an economist named Moore in, 1911?
Yep, 1911.
So the rule is basically this. Generally speaking, a worker at a massive 1,000-person firm earns about 4% to 8% more than an identical worker doing the exact same job at a tiny 100-person firm.
Basically, big companies pay more.
Exactly. Big companies pay more.
And that wage premium, that 4 to 8%, it's been this stubborn, persistent fact across completely different countries, different industries, and frankly, entirely different economic eras.
Wow, so it's a really well-established rule.
Very well established. And the traditional explanation for why this happens relies on a standard economic concept called monopsony.
Okay, monopsony. Let's make sure we define that clearly because, economics jargon can get really dense really quickly.
Fair enough. So think of a monopoly, where there's only one seller of a product, giving them total power over the price.
Right, like if there's only one cable company in town.
Exactly. Now, monopsony is basically the flip side of that. It means buyer power. In the labor market, the company is the buyer of your labor.
Okay, tracking so far.
So the traditional theory says that as a company tries to buy more and more labor in a single town, they eventually run out of the cheap options.
Right.
So if a local hardware store needs to hire 10 people, they can easily find 10 people willing to work for, say, $20 an hour.
Because it's just 10 people.
Right.
But if a massive warehouse moves into that exact same town and suddenly needs to hire 1,000 people,
Right.
they are going to exhaust that pool of people willing to work for $20 by lunchtime.
Right. That is the core mechanism, yes. To pull people off the sidelines or to convince people to quit their current jobs to come work for the warehouse, the company is forced to sweeten the deal.
They have to bump the pay.
They have to. They offer $22, then $25. Economists call this an upward sloping labor supply curve.
Upward sloping. Got it.
Yeah, and the key here is that the companies don't offer more money out of the goodness of their hearts, right? They offer it out of absolute sheer necessity just to hit their massive headcount.
Which makes total sense. But here's where it gets really interesting. This brings us to the 2026 findings by Dijkman and colleagues and the massive twist in this story.
This is the part that really shifts our perspective.
Right, because they didn't just look at big firms versus small firms. They looked inside single, large, multi-establishment firms.
Right, the internal mechanics.
Yeah, we're talking about massive retail chains, logistics giants, manufacturers with plants scattered literally everywhere. And what they found is that when you look inside a single corporate entity, that 4% to 8% wage premium for size, it completely
Just
vanishes.
disappears.
Completely. The elasticity of the wage to the size of the establishment is exactly zero.
And just to clarify that term for everyone, elasticity in economics is just a measure of stretch.
Stretch, okay.
Yeah, how stretchy or responsive is one thing when another thing changes. Normally, when a company's need for workers stretches up to a massive number, the wage stretches up with it.
Like the warehouse example.
Exactly.
Hmm.
But inside these large firms, the wage has zero stretch. It refuses to budge no matter how desperately that specific location needs bodies.
It's mathematically baffling to me. I was thinking about it like buying concert tickets.
Okay, how so?
Well, usually if you want to buy out an entire premium section of seats, like if you want massive volume, you have to pay a scalper a premium just to get all those seats together.
Right. Bulk comes with a premium in that scenario.
But inside these massive firms, it's like the local manager is somehow acquiring thousands of front row seats for the exact same price as a single nosebleed ticket in the back row.
That's a great analogy.
Right. But how? How are they mathematically pulling that off?
Well, that is the ultimate puzzle. To understand the how, we have to look at the battlefield these companies are actually operating on. We're dealing with what the paper calls multi-establishment firms, or MEFs.
Multi-establishment firms. Oh,
Yeah, these are enterprises with geographically separated operations, but they operate under unified ownership and control.
So massive restaurant groups, national retail chains, service firms with vast branch networks.
Exactly. And these aren't just, small niche players in the economy.
No, definitely not. I mean, these companies dictate the reality for a massive chunk of our listeners. In the U.S. alone, these multi-unit firms make up roughly 45% of the entire private workforce.
Almost half the workforce.
Yeah, they completely dominate retail trade, food services, and professional services.
And the German data used in this study mirrors this dominance perfectly. In Germany, these firms account for over 30% of employment in utilities, telecommunications, and financial services.
What about manufacturing? I know Germany's huge on that.
Manufacturing's a bit lower, it's around 7%, but the overarching challenge remains absolutely identical regardless of the sector.
Which is what?
Extreme internal coordination.
Yes, the coordination, the sheer scale of the internal chaos is what blows my mind here.
Oh, it's a massive puzzle for them.
Within a single German firm in this data set, the individual locations can vary in size by a factor of 10.
Right.
So you have a tiny, 50-person branch in a quiet rural valley, and then a massive 500-person branch right in the middle of a booming, super expensive city.
And those branches are sitting in local labor markets where the baseline going rate for wages differs by, 15 to 20%?
Exactly. 15 to 20% difference in the local going rate.
But the geographic spread is a strategic necessity. Retailers have to chase the customers, so they blanket the map. Manufacturers have to build near specific transport hubs or raw materials.
Right. You can't just put everything in one cheap town.
No, you can't. But that physical footprint creates a spectacular human resources headache. Headquarters is basically constantly playing this tug of war between maintaining corporate consistency and bowing to local economic reality.
Okay, let's unpack this, because I want to play devil's advocate for a second.
Go for it.
If I'm putting myself in the shoes of a CEO, this sounds like an objectively terrible business strategy.
How so?
Well, if I mandate that we pay an identical base wage at every single one of my stores, I am basically setting money on fire.
I see what you're saying.
I'm drastically overpaying my staff in that low-wage rural town, and I am helplessly underpaying my staff in the highly competitive city, which means I'll be chronically understaffed in the city. Why wouldn't I just let the local managers set the pay based on what their specific town requires?
On a purely local spreadsheet, your logic is flawless. It is inefficient locally.
Thank you. So why do they do it?
Because large firms willingly swallow that local inefficiency to buy something they value far more. Internal equity.
Internal equity. Okay, explain that.
Think about the resentment factor. If workers find out they're doing the exact same grueling shift, wearing the same uniform for the exact same corporate brand, but getting paid less simply because their specific branch is smaller,
Oh, wow. Yeah.
it destroys organizational morale.
It becomes a massive grievance issue. People would be furious.
Precisely. And beyond just morale, standardizing pay scales eliminates an unbelievable amount of administrative friction.
What do you mean?
Well, imagine the overhead of a centralized HR department trying to calculate, negotiate and monitor custom wage curves for 400 different local labor markets.
Oh gosh, that would be a nightmare.
It would be paralyzing. So they choose the simplicity of a unified employer brand over local market optimization.
Which means, for you listening, there are clear winners and losers here, right? Depending entirely on where you sit in that corporate structure.
Absolutely.
If you work at a very small branch of a huge firm, you are winning. You're likely getting a wage premium because your compensation is being anchored by your employer's massive national profitability rather than the tiny footprint of your specific town.
You basically get the corporate brand premium.
Right. But if you work at the biggest branch of that firm, you're absorbing the loss. Your wages are being artificially compressed.
The data shows you're likely receiving lower wages than a comparably productive employee who works at a giant single-site company operating right across the street.
Wow.
Yeah, the firm-wide policy essentially redistributes the compensation power from the massive urban units down to the smaller rural ones just to keep everything flat.
But that still leaves us with a glaring mechanical problem, doesn't it?
Which one?
Well, if a giant firm needs to hire 500 people in a tight, expensive city market, and they flat out refuse to raise the hourly wage to attract them, how do they actually get people in the door?
Right, it seems impossible.
If the local manager can't bump the pay to, say, $25 an hour, the warehouse just stays empty, right?
Not necessarily.
Yeah.
And this is where we uncover the actual mechanics of the corporate playbook.
Okay, let's hear it.
These firms operate off the labor supply curve, utilizing a very specific set of alternative levers that don't involve touching the base salary at all.
Interesting.
Let's look at how Volkswagen handles this tension.
Oh, VW. The scale of Volkswagen in the German data is just staggering. They have manufacturing plants ranging from just a few hundred workers all the way up to these sprawling complexes with over 40,000 employees.
40,000. And those plants sit in wildly different local economies.
Right.
Yet VW uses highly standardized works council agreements. So the manager of that 40,000-person facility is essentially blocked from using wage hikes to solve acute local hiring shortages.
Their hands are completely tied by corporate policy.
Exactly. So instead of throwing money at the hourly rate, they lean entirely into their institutional weight.
What does that look like?
They utilize the prestige of the VW employer brand. They rely on their comprehensive training infrastructure, and their long-term job security promises to pull workers in.
Okay, so they lean on the brand, but what happens when prestige just isn't enough?
That brings us to our second tactic: how companies handle the sheer cost of finding people when wages are frozen.
The text highlights McDonald's here, right? Specifically looking at their corporate-owned stores.
Yes, this is where you see the substitution of recruitment dollars for wage dollars.
Okay, break that down for me.
Think about the disparity between a small McDonald's off a rural highway employing maybe 15 people and a massive flagship location in a dense urban center needing over 80 workers just to keep the drive-thru moving.
Massive difference in volume.
Huge. But the corporate mandate forces highly compressed wages across both. So the manager of that 80-person urban flagship cannot just raise the starting wage by $3 to instantly attract 80 applications.
Right, so what do they do instead? If they can't pay more per hour, how do they staff it?
They shift their spending to costlier non-wage margins.
Like what?
Corporate pumps money into massive, dedicated recruiting teams. They aggressively market tuition assistance programs. They build out complex software to offer highly flexible, custom scheduling.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, the actual monetary cost to recruit a single hire at that large urban location is substantially higher. They might spend double the money just to locate and onboard a willing worker.
That is wild to think about. From the outside, it seems absurd that they would rather spend a fortune on a bloated HR recruiting apparatus than just give the workers a $2 raise.
It does seem counterintuitive.
But from the corporate perspective, that one-time recruitment cost is infinitely safer than creating a permanent establishment-specific wage premium, right? Because that would trigger a domino effect of internal equity demands across the entire country.
Exactly. It contains the cost. But, wait, we shouldn't paint with too broad a brush here.
What do you mean?
It isn't that these giant corporations are completely blind to local economies. I mean, what happens when the cost of living between two cities is so drastically different that a flat national wage becomes literally impossible to survive on?
Right. This is exactly what the Starbucks example in the research illustrates. They definitely adjust for geography.
They have to.
The data shows a Starbucks in San Francisco pays 30% to 40% more than a Starbucks in Nashville. They have to, or their baristas couldn't afford a bus pass, let alone rent.
Right, they define explicit geographic pay zones based on cost of living. But, and this is the crucial distinction that proves the rule, within that specific market, the size of the store becomes invisible to the payroll department.
This is the part that applies directly to the listener's daily reality. Like, within Seattle itself, you could have a quiet, low-foot traffic, 15-person store on a side street,
Right.
and a chaotic, high-volume, 35-person store right in the middle of the financial district, and they pay the exact same starting wage.
Identical.
Size and volume do not matter, only the zip code matters. If you're sweating through a shift at the huge, demanding store, you aren't getting paid more per hour for that volume.
To compensate for that intense environment, Starbucks pivots to stock programs, comprehensive healthcare benefits, and faster advancement opportunities.
Oh, so they funnel ambitious people into those higher volume locations without breaking the localized wage ceiling?
Exactly.
But sometimes all the tuition assistance and healthcare in the world just isn't enough to attract top-tier talent if your hourly rate is just too low for the local market.
True.
And this leads to a friction point that I find fascinating, where companies just have to take the hit. Target is the prime example of how firms manage the fallout of lower productivity.
Right. Because if a company like Target operates a massive 500-employee distribution center, but outright refuses to pay top-of-market wages for that local area, there's a natural consequence.
Which is?
They are going to struggle to attract the absolute best, most efficient, most productive talent. The highly skilled logistics workers will simply go to the competitor down the street who's paying $3 more.
And the German data actually proved this out, didn't it?
It did.
When researchers looked closely, the larger establishments within these multi-unit firms actually employ workers with slightly lower estimated productivity than their smaller branches.
The data unequivocally bears that out. The firms willingly accept a modest downgrade in worker quality rather than shatter their firm-wide wage harmony.
So the obvious question is, how does a massive Target facility survive if their workforce is slightly less productive?
They substitute human talent with machines and micromanagement.
Okay, interesting.
They invest heavily in automation-expensive conveyor belts, algorithmic sorting, to make up for the labor constraints.
So the machines pick up the slack.
Right. And they institute incredibly intense, rigid performance management systems on the floor. They manage every minute of the shift tighter because they know they aren't paying the premium required to just hire self-directed top-tier talent.
It's a systemic substitution of capital and management oversight to compensate for the lack of a wage premium.
Which brings us to perhaps the most agonizing tactic of all, especially if you are a local manager trying to hit a growth target.
Oh, the time manipulation.
Yes. When companies can't manipulate the wage, they manipulate time itself. The research highlights UPS here and how they handle massive expansions.
Okay, think about the logistics of a UPS hub that currently has 200 workers, but due to e-commerce demands, headquarters says they need to expand to 500 workers.
A huge jump.
Huge. Standard economic theory dictates that to pull 300 new people out of the local market quickly, you aggressively raise the wage. You signal the market.
But UPS has incredibly strict Teamster-negotiated wage scales to protect.
Right.
A local hub manager cannot just go rogue and offer a massive signing bonus or a higher hourly rate.
So instead of using a price signal, they alter the timeline. Instead of a standard 6 to 12-month expansion plan to hire those 300 people, corporate deliberately stretches the timeline to 18 to 24 months.
They literally just wait it out.
That has to be infuriating for the local manager who needs those boxes moved tomorrow.
Oh, absolutely. But corporate forces them to accept that it will take 2 excruciating years to find those people at the current rigid wage.
Wow.
They bridge the gap by ramping up recruiting intensity early, partnering with outside workforce agencies, and utilizing temporary or contract workers.
So they do all that just so they never, ever have to permanently alter that core wage structure.
Exactly. They view a sluggish, agonizing 2-year hiring process as infinitely preferable to a localized wage differentiation. Because again, that would spark a wildfire of internal equity demands across the entire logistics network.
Okay, so what does this all mean for you? We've walked through this incredible data. We've seen the internal friction, the intense HR strategies, the automation, the delayed timelines.
It's a lot to take in.
It is. If you are listening to this right now, whether you're a job seeker looking for your next role, a manager trying to staff a team, or just someone trying to understand your own paycheck, how do you use this intelligence?
There are two vital takeaways that you need to internalize if you operate in this 45% of the economy.
Okay, what's the first one?
The first is that you must look beyond the base salary during your negotiations.
Because in many of these giant firms, the base salary is essentially locked in a corporate vault that the local hiring manager doesn't even have the key to.
Exactly. The hands of these local managers are tied by corporate policy. But because they cannot compete for you on base wages, headquarters is pouring massive amounts of money into alternative buckets.
The non-wage margins we talked about.
Right. They have distinct budgets for signature benefits programs.
Mm.
If you're negotiating or job hunting at a massive corporate location, understand that while the firm might be completely inflexible on the hourly rate, they might be highly flexible on schedule design, remote work days, or authorizing thousands of dollars in educational benefits.
So if you're applying at that massive downtown flagship store, don't waste your leverage fighting for $1 more an hour that they physically cannot give you.
No, don't do that.
Ask for the tuition assistance. Ask for the premium shifts. Because that is the only bucket of money they are allowed to touch to get you in the door.
That's spot on. Now, the second core takeaway is about how you actually advance your career trajectory.
Okay, let's hear it.
Because these large firms refuse to use wages to aggressively compete in the external local market, internal mobility becomes the real currency.
They're essentially walling themselves off from the local economy and creating their own internal economy.
Exactly. And within that internal economy, opportunity matters significantly more than external market forces.
So how does that play out for the worker?
They rely heavily on internal career ladders, proprietary training programs, and transferring their high performers between different establishments.
Gotcha.
If you are working within one of these multi-establishment giants, waiting for your local city's job market to force your branch to raise wages is a losing game.
Yeah, you'll be waiting forever.
Your fastest, most reliable path to increased compensation is through internal promotion or a strategic transfer to a different role entirely.
It's an incredible shift in perspective. We're talking about 25% to 45% of the modern economy operating completely off the supply curve.
It is wild.
They're blatantly ignoring the most basic rules of supply and demand that we all learned in Econ 101, all in the name of internal harmony and administrative survival.
It forces us to completely rethink the foundational assumptions about how local labor markets function and clear. The traditional models just don't apply inside these corporate behemoths.
As we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with one final, slightly provocative thought to chew on regarding the source material.
The broader implications here raise an existential question about the future of work and geography.
How so?
If these giant companies fundamentally refuse to bid up wages based on how scarce labor is at a specific local establishment, and instead rely strictly on their global profitability and corporate policies to set your pay, does that mean the specific town or city you live in is slowly losing its power as a bargaining chip?
That is a fascinating question. If the local market can't force the wage up, does the local market even matter to your paycheck anymore?
Right. If location matters less and less to the corporate pay scale, maybe the future of your salary isn't about where you sit, but simply who you work for.
Wow.
The corporate badge on your lanyard might dictate your economic reality far more than the zip code on your house.
That is a phenomenal point. If the gravity of local supply and demand no longer applies inside these massive companies, you really do have to rethink your entire strategy for career growth. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the rules of the working world because, as we've seen today, sometimes the apples don't fall, sometimes the corporate office just decides to suspend gravity entirely.